Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's episode, we're going to follow up on one story from yesterday's delayed episode, and that's on the delayed response of the safety crew to AJ Allmendinger on Sunday at Talladega. Brad Moran addressed the topic yesterday on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. But the main theme of today's episode is Cup Series crew chiefs and the playoffs. Yesterday, I was on calls with multiple crew chiefs, including Chase Briscoe's crew chief, James Small, Denny Hamlin's crew chief, Gale, and Joey Logano's crew chief, Paul Wolfe. I had the opportunity to ask each one a question, and I asked a couple of them about how their teams were using AI. Both Small and Wolfe offered responses, and they weren't what I expected. For Gale, I asked him about the frustrated words of his driver on Sunday at Talladega, following his stuck throttle issue, and how Hamlin said the organization needed to get its bleep together to keep cars from breaking down. Gale was very thoughtful in his response. Plus, I want to also share another comment from Gale to another reporter's question about how this season with Hamlin almost never happened. And we'll wrap up with our By the Numbers segment. However, before we start crunching those numbers, let's go back to yesterday and Cup Series Managing Director Brad Moran's appearance on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. He was asked about the response to AJ Allmendinger's burning car on Sunday. Take a listen.
So, and one of those was AJ Allmendinger, who hit the wall pretty hard in turn 3, came down onto the skid pad. The car was on fire. AJ had to unbuckle and then was laying there on the pavement itself. What is the response time like trying to get to a driver that needs help like AJ was needing on Sunday while managing what's going on the racetrack, but trying to get to him also in an expedient fashion at the same time?
Yeah, I mean our ECS, our emergency safety crew, they do a lot of training, and obviously at the super speedways they can be quite challenging because the incident can spread, obviously, as it did in this instance where you had some big hard hits. I mean, you had the 16, you had the 7, you had the 4. With all really significant hits, the 9 as well. They were all big hits, and the as far as getting the equipment out, they have to be cautious, make sure that, first of all the cars that are in the incident and wrecking and spinning and so on are all stopped at that point before they shoot out of any openings. Also got to look at the rest of the field, make sure they have we have the field kind of under control, and then they head out with everything they got, which was, I believe, the fire truck was the first one on site with the 16, and their other 2 chase vehicles were dealing with the other cars that were further back from kind of where the wreck actually happened. But again, our group, they train throughout the year. They do the same thing we do from the competition standpoint. They'll review all the video, all the radio communication, the time, the locations where they come out, and I'm sure that'll be looked at and discussed today as well.
I understand Moran saying how there were multiple cars with big hits and it takes time to get to all of them. I also saw all your comments to my video suggesting it took safety workers too long. I guess all we can hope is, like Moran said, that they will evaluate what happened on Sunday and hopefully improve it going forward. Now let's move on to our crew chief combos. So as I mentioned at the top, I was on calls with multiple crew chiefs yesterday. I want to start off with Denny Hamlin's crew chief, Gale. But before I do, I want to remind you what happened to the number 11 team on Sunday at Talladega.
All I know is turn the motor off and then work it. That's the only thing I can tell you.
Okay. This is fucking unbelievable. Why can't we keep our cars together?
Yeah, copy that.
We got to get our shit together at the shop to keep our cars from breaking down.
Denny was obviously frustrated on Sunday at Talladega with the stuck throttle. He asked, why can't we keep our cars together? And then he said, we got to get our shit together at the shop to keep our cars from breaking down. So from your perspective, how much of a concern is reliability heading into the championship for? And are there any steps you can take to make sure something like this doesn't happen when everything's on the line?
For sure. Now, I think at that point, right, he's just frustrated. He knows what just happened today, and he doesn't know the details. To be quite honest with you, we don't even know the details fully well at that point in time when that conversation is happening. So obviously, we're always worried about durability, right? And there's a portion that we can control from Joe Gibbs Racing side. There's a portion that Toyota can control that they're kind of in charge of. And then there's kind of the overlap where we both are involved in doing everything we can to keep from having problems. I'm not worried about it at Phoenix related to the incident that happened at Talladega. I think it's two different situations, and what was happening there will not necessarily be a problem at Phoenix. But we're always, I mean, no matter the problem, we go in and look at it and try to keep from having problems. Now, with that being said, I don't think we've fallen out of many races this year. We've had a clutch issue, back in Kansas time. We have had some starter issues intermittently, which it seems like is a full garage thing. They're having problems across the garage with this at times. And then that's really been about it that I can recall. So, I think at that point he just didn't know the full situation.
So that was his answer to my question. Now I want you to listen to a question he was asked by NBC's Nate Ryan.
Denny's won a lot this year, obviously. So that means he's been in the media center a lot after races with Joe Gibbs. And one thing that they've kind of talked about multiple times is how you and Denny got put together. And I think it was maybe the last race, maybe two wins ago, where they both talked about how it came together rather quickly. And Denny kind of was given like 24 hours to say yes to you being the crew chief. And Joe Gibbs, I think, said you had another offer to go to another team. I was wondering to just get your perspective on all that. Like, how close were you to possibly leaving Joe Gibbs Racing? And was it just a matter of if Denny said yes, you were going to do this, or was there more to it than that?
I think in general, I was really close to leaving, but I do agree. The timeline was all correct, what they've said. I kind of had another offer on the table, and that had basically a time limit on how long that was going to be available. So that's what kind of pushed the timeline ahead is, I can't leave somebody else hanging if that's what I'm going to do. Did I want to stay at Joe Gibbs Racing? Yes. Did I want to be in a more competitive environment where I felt I could help? Yes. And was that with the 11 team in Denny? Correct. And yeah, it kind of sat there to where Denny wasn't expecting any of this, right? This really isn't fair to him. He doesn't see this coming at all. And he doesn't know everything that's kind of going on behind the scenes to get to this point. But he got stuck with, because of the, escalated timeline that I had, to having to kind of, okay, I'm either in or I'm out, and I got 24, 48 hours to decide this. And I think ultimately it came down to where I don't know that he knew what the right answer was. And I don't know that you could expect anybody to in 24 or 48 hours. There's not a whole lot more information to gather. It's just a matter of, are you in or are you out, knowing the new information? And I think ultimately he trusted Coach. And I think that's what it really came down to. He trusted that Coach was trying to do the best he could to pair the right people together, and he would not shortchange him or do anything related to that. That wasn't what this move was about. It was about trying to make the whole company stronger. Obviously Gabehart was leaving to become the competition director. So what fit next that made sense from an experience perspective, from an understanding of how things went, from an understanding really of how the 11 team already functioned with the number of people they had in place. So it was more that, I wanted to stay here, but for sure, if I wasn't going to necessarily get this opportunity, I was probably going to leave Joe Gibbs Racing for sure.
I knew that Denny was surprised by the move of Chris Gabehart up to JGR competition director, as he's talked about extensively on his podcast. But I didn't know the part about Gale being offered another job at another organization and him almost taking it. It's one of those things that makes you wonder, what happens if he had taken it? Would Denny be having this kind of season? A season you number 11 fans know is his best since 2020 with 6 wins and a berth in the championship 4. Things that make you go, All right, now let's move on to the other crew chiefs I spoke to yesterday. And we'll start with Gale's JGR counterpart, James Small. And we'll follow up with Joey Logano's crew chief, Paul Wolfe. I asked both of them the same question about AI. Where do you see AI starting to impact your life personally? And where do you think it could have the biggest effect on NASCAR professionally, whether it's competition, preparation, or strategy?
It's a good question. And, actually right now we don't use it much at all. So, but definitely there's avenues I know, that we could improve efficiency, just in a lot of mining of, data and information and things like that is really the next step I see for us. And, just trying to automate a lot of the processes we have in trying to, help feed the driver with information and things like that. I know there's many tools on the market that kind of already do that for certain racing series and things like that. But it's definitely an area I imagine every team's going to start putting more and more focus on. because, we're so time limited, and, especially on the weekend and through practice and in the qualifying, there's definitely areas that, if it's all done right, we can create a lot more efficiency and get more information quickly to the driver.
Yeah, obviously I'm aware of it. I wouldn't say it's a big part of my life at the moment. I think you always got to be open-minded and be prepared for what's the next new thing coming along, and how is it going to impact us here at Team Penske. And to answer your question, I think it could have an impact on every area. I don't think there's one part of the program where it couldn't potentially impact us. It's just weighing out, in a positive way or negative ways, because I think there could be things that you could say could go both ways on that. And I think it's just continuing, as we do with any tools in our disposal here at Penske. You got to continue to be smart with them and maximize them, but understand that there's not just one tool or one process or idea that's gonna make it work. And I think, as I look at our company and our teams here and how we work together and things we do, everyone's got a little different approach to things, and at times it can be frustrating, or trying to understand my approach or how I look at a situation versus maybe one of the other crew chiefs. I think it's healthy to have different approaches, and kind of mix it together, if that makes sense. And that was no different than when Todd Gordon was here, and him and I worked close together. We didn't always have the same approach or see things the same way, but I think we balanced each other out pretty well. And I think that's really what makes the strength of our team here, and how all our how everyone works together is having that different thought processes and bringing everyone together and making it all work, because there's not just one individual or one thought or one idea that's going to bring success to the company. So as I look at the AI, like you talk about, I think it could be useful in a lot of areas, and it's something that we're mindful of, and we'll use it as we see the need for it.
I have to tell you, I was really surprised with Small's initial response when he admitted we don't use it much at all. Then Paul Wolfe said something similar. The reason for my surprise is, if you'll recall, I interviewed Hendrick Motorsports technical director Tom Gray a couple of months ago, and he talked about how HMS has been using machine learning and some type of AI for years. To hear both JGR and Penske are not using it very much at all, at least based on what they told me, is surprising. But as both Small and Wolfe indicated, it's something they are open to and more than likely will be using more in the future. And now it's time for our By the Numbers segment. And we're going to start with this week's last 5 races analysis. For a third consecutive week, Christopher Bell sits atop the standings by at least a couple of spots over his Joe Gibbs Racing teammate, Chase Briscoe. Interestingly, this week's 4.6 average finishing position is Bell's lowest number in the last 3 weeks, after he posted his worst result in his last 5 races, an 8th on Sunday at Talladega. In other words, Bell has been really good in his last 5. Chase Briscoe has been strong as well in his last 5 with an AFP of 6.6, which includes 4 of his last 5 results inside the top 10, including his championship 4 berth clinching win on Sunday. Kyle Larson slots in third, 2 spots behind at 8.6, and you number 5 fans have to look at those numbers, and specifically that 26th place finish on Sunday, and think what might have been had that final lap gone differently. Tyler Reddick is in the 4th position with an AFP of 10 even, which includes his last 4 finishes all inside the top 10. And there's a surprise in 5th this week with Michael McDowell. The number 71 driver has been consistent over his last 5, including a pair of top 10 finishes. I have to show you Hamlin's numbers in the 6th spot, just because his results have been all over the place in his last 5. Rounding out the top 10 are Joey Logano, Ryan Preece, Todd Gilliland, who secured his career best finish on Sunday in 2nd, and Chase Elliott and Bubba Wallace are tied for 10th. Now let's move on to our race progression graphs, and I have to first point out how this week's graphs are certainly different from what we've seen in the past. What do I mean exactly? Well, let's take a look at last week's top 5, and you can see how those who start up front often stay up front throughout the race, and as a result, finish up front. Now take a look at this week's top 5 finishers, and there's absolutely no pattern of consistency. Whether it's on lap 50, 100, or 150, you would have been hard-pressed to pick a winner at that point based on the running order. Or, as we've come to know it, super speedway racing, where it's a wild card and anyone can win. We saw Chase Briscoe and Ty Gibbs inside the top 5. As for the other JGR cars, Christopher Bell, as mentioned in our last 5, had a solid day finishing 8th, while Denny Hamlin and his stuck throttle issues had him finishing worst of the group in 24th. Speaking of worst, I mentioned in Monday's episode how Sunday's race was the worst finish for Hendrick Motorsports in a dozen years. This graph reflects that, as all 4 cars finished 25th or worse for the first time in a race since June 2013 at Michigan. The Penske cars are known for running up front at super speedways. On Sunday, both Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney appeared to be in good position late in the race, but the final results didn't reflect that, as they finished 16th and 23rd, respectively. Our last graph for the day is the guys at 23XI Racing. As you can see, all 3 of the cars sniffed the front at one point or another, but it was Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick who managed to stay there and bring it home inside the top 10. Now let's take a look at our biggest movers on the day, starting with those heading in the wrong direction. Justin Haley was involved in that 9-car incident and lost 17 spots in the race. He was followed by Alex Bowman, who dropped 18, Riley Herbst, who fell 23, and Josh Berry, who tumbled 27 positions on the day. But the biggest loser was Austin Cindric, who was also involved in that big first stage crash, and he plummeted 30 spots. Conversely, those heading in the right direction featured some surprising names, including Anthony Alfredo, who gained 17 positions, SVG, who finished 11th, gained 20 spots, Casey Mears picked up an impressive 22 spots and finished 18th. Runner-up finisher Todd Gilliland gained 25 positions, but the biggest gainer on the day was Carson Hocevar, who picked up 26 spots. And finally, we'll wrap up this week's By the Number segment with our Mario Kart point standings. First, let's take a look at last week's numbers. And you can see Christopher Bell held a 14-point advantage over second place Kyle Larson, a 17-point margin over Denny Hamlin, and an 18-point lead over Chase Briscoe. This week, Bell's lead has shrunk down to 10 points, and it's now Briscoe who is his closest pursuer after his win at Talladega. Larson was shut out in points this week and still clings to third, but now sits 21 points off the lead, while Denny Hamlin picked up a single point at Dega and is 23 points behind his JGR teammate. Based on these numbers, it looks like it's a 2-horse race going into the final 2 races. All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's episode. Let's discuss. First, I know some of you already shared your feelings on the safety crew's delayed response to AJ Allmendinger on Sunday. Now I want to hear what you have to say to Brad Moran's response to the situation. Next up, let me hear what you thought about the crew chief's remarks. For you number 11 fans, what did you think of Chris Gale's response to my question about Denny voicing his concerns on Sunday about the cars breaking down? And play along with me on this hypothetical. What if Chris Gale went to that other team? Would Hamlin be having the same level of success this season? And lastly, what did you think about the responses of James Small and Paul Wolfe to my question about the teams and their use of AI? Were you as surprised as I was? And let me know what you thought about this week's By the Numbers segment. Any particular numbers in there that caught you by surprise? As always, I wanted to thank you guys for checking out the latest episode and supporting the channel. I really and truly appreciate it, and hope you have a great rest of your day.